Okay. All right. Last week we finished the novel We, and we're gonna chat a little bit about why I thought it was important to cover that. I'm gonna move myself way down here in the bottom right hand corner because as you see, I got a bunch of tabs open, and I don't think we're gonna get to everything. I think there's a couple of things up here I'm gonna skip over and probably save until next week. Pull them up. I don't know. We'll figure that out as we go. But yeah, we finished the novel We. All right. So, why did I find it important? Excuse me. Why did I find it important to read the novel We? Well, I had discovered over the last few years that not a lot of people had ever heard of that book. And it being such an influential dystopian novel on um, our the dystopians that we turn back to, like 1984 and Brave New World. I thought it was important, but there are some themes in that book. And I took some notes just to make sure I didn't forget any of them that I thought were very fitting to our current society. It We exposes long held fears of a one party authoritarian government. There, the United States has the well doer has taken full control and is constantly monitoring the movements of the individuals. There's no privacy. Um, there's really no intimacy, despite all the references to them having, their fornication time. You're taught to censor yourself and hold yourself within the community and the approved thought of the community in order to be a good citizen and operate for the well-being of everyone else. You're made to feel superior to other societies through your managerial mindset and your organization, your structure. You're subdued and domesticated through meaningless passions being fulfilled by government mandate. The state as meaning grants you jobs and defines your existence. Any that question or disobey must be crushed by state power, and the family's destroyed. Mothers are put to death after giving birth to a child so that the child comes to revere the state as the parent and doesn't cling to the nurturing mother. And the destruction of the Christian God were very, very evident in the pages of We. And I think this is really important to notice because God and family are the biggest dangers to the state. And God and family are what makes liberty so important and what makes our independence and individuality so important. And it makes me think of like the story of the Tower of Babel. I just started thinking, I was like, all right, so like for hundreds of years, there were these warring tribes, clans, and hordes clashing with each other, going to war with each other, killing each other. And the leaders of these clans, these hordes, and these tribes continued to come together and try to make peace and sign treaties and get together until eventually everything kind of settled and they were able to begin working together for what they thought was the good of humanity. But what they were doing is they were trying to replace God with the government, with the establishment, with the elite class, with the managerial class that were coming that were making the decisions. And they came together and they started to build this unifying global structure that we know as the Tower of Babel, which is an interesting symbol because the tower represents a manufactured mountain. And the reason being is because in the past, throughout history, all religions saw their gods as living up on top of a mountain. This is where you get Mount Olympus and all these things. It's that was like where the Garden of Eden was, at the top of a mountain. Like the gods dwelled on tops of mountains. And so they were they were they were orchestrating and erecting a man-made mountain for man to reside on top of, for man, the elite class, to be the gods of the society underneath, right? Moses went up to the top of the mountain to get the Ten Commandments. They were going to the top of the mountain to rule with an iron fist over the society below them, that existed below them. And it's just quite an interesting symbol. We don't know if they were like truly like erecting a temple or a mountain or a tower, but what they were doing is they were uplifting themselves and making themselves at the center and putting themselves up as equals with God. And God found a way to destroy that institution, the institutions that they had built, and whether destroying an actual literal tower, or a NATO or a UN or whatever that had been constructed during that period. And it's because, like, as man moves forward through society, and you'll see this constantly if you make yourself aware of it, man is constantly trying to solve the world's problems with man's ideas, and not with the traditional ideas that God has bestowed upon us, and with the not with the tradition, like the traditional logic or reason that God has granted us through through history. And this is why people will say that history repeats itself, or it doesn't quite repeat itself, but it always rhymes, that type deal. And it's always man's ideal that becomes the center of this tyrannical authoritarian structure, and it turns horribly wrong. I mean, when you look at Mao's China, Stalin or Lenin in the Soviet Union and Russia, Hitler in Germany, Pol Pot, any of these authoritarians, they were lifting themselves up to being equal with God. And that's gone on throughout history, and it continues through to this day. Whereas in North Korea, the dear leader is considered to be, bestowed upon them from heaven, and a god amongst men in many ways. So I just thought that was interesting, and I thought that was like a valuable uh, assessment and a valuable novel to read through for the purposes of understanding just the even in the 1920s, there was this fear of the totalitarian, of the authoritarian, taking over, and what it would mean for that authoritarian and totalitarian to take over would mean uplifting their own self-worth up to being equal to God. And so I thought it was a valuable novel to read through, and I'm glad y'all stuck with me to read through it, and I hope y'all enjoyed it. And if y'all want to read more novels and stuff like that, things like that, I have one. I haven't even read it yet. I just got it not that long ago, called The Camp of the Saints, and it's supposed to be really good. Which kind of leads me into like what we're going to get into today. We're going to talk a lot about immigration today, and a lot about what's been going on with immigration over the years, and and how it's been weaponized against America, our liberties, and our institutions. And I've been kind of like, I've been posting on X about this and putting my thoughts up on X. And so if you follow me on X, it's at TD Salmons, is what my handle is at X. But if you're following me on X, you've been seeing me put things up And maybe you didn't really quite understand where I was going with it, but I hope I'm able to tie all these themes together today and kind of show you where I've been going with all of this. So I want to start here. This is from the World Economic Forum, and this says the link between immigration and inequality. And I over here, I had taken a couple of screenshots of this right here. Yeah. And so we're going to start, and this is towards the beginning of the article, up towards the top of the article. And it says, when one weighs all of the world's citizens equally, things look very different. In particular, the same forces of globalization that have contributed to stagnant middle class wages in rich countries have lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty elsewhere. So we've talked about subsidizing people's defense. We've been subsidizing people's medical care, and now this is saying that we're also subsidizing their economies. We're subsidizing their way of life. It's up to us to take a hit to our wallets, to our way of living, to the way that we raise our children, so that we can uplift those in other nations and boost their economies in other nations. And I've always made it a very clear point that my entire purpose for working as hard as I have, for the last 30 years is because I wanted to make sure that my children had a good life. I was not working to ensure the lifestyle of Somalis in Mogadishu. I was not working to ensure the lifestyle of Nicaraguans in Nicaragua or in Panama City. That's not been on my mind. That is not what I'm thinking of when I go to work every morning. It is to ensure that my wife and my children and my grandchildren have a better future. But many measures, global inequality has been reduced significantly over the past 3 decades, implying that capitalism has succeeded. Capitalism has perhaps eroded rents that workers in advanced countries enjoy by virtue of where they were born, but it has done even more to help the world's true middle income workers in Asia and emerging markets. Allowing freer flows of people across borders would equalize opportunities even faster than trade. Regrettably, however, the inequality debate has focused so intensely on domestic inequality that the far larger issue of global inequality has been overshadowed. That is a pity because there are many ways rich countries can make a difference. They can provide free online medical and education support, more development aid, debt write downs, market access, and greater contributions to global security. And this was written by a professor of economics and public policy at Harvard University. So it's not somebody that does not understand economics in any way, shape, or form. It's someone that understands economics quite well, quite well. And they are telling you, like, it is up to you to boost China's economy. That the first world nations of the West, the United States, Canada, Europe, European nations, the UK, all have to take a hit to our lifestyles in order to ensure that China and Indonesia and Korea, South Korea, more specifically, Japan, South Africa, all these countries are depending on you. They're depending on you doing worse so that they can do better. And as evidenced here, no, don't turn all that. So here at the White Papers Policy Institute X account, they say 37% of Nicaragua's GDP is remittances from the U.S. That's about $6.2 billion a year. 25% of El Salvador's GDP is remittances from the United States. 27% of Honduras's economy. 19% of Guatemala's economy. This is the percentage of their economy that depends on remittances. That's money coming out of the United States, many times through the illegal immigrants that have come into the United States, making money and sending money out of the United States. This is money that could go in your pocket. It could go in your children's pocket. It could go in your grandchildren's pocket. It could be your next promotion. It could increase the wages of all the Americans here in the United States. But instead of all that taking place, it is being sent to foreign nations to subsidize these nations. 70% of Hispanic migrants are using the welfare state. Americans are all paying for this. No, not that one yet. We're going to exit this one. Okay. The children of immigrants and the grandchildren of immigrants are using welfare at rates 20 points higher than U.S. citizens. It's crucial for Americans, Brits, Canadians, Europeans, any Westerner to grasp that when bringing in immigrants, you are taking on a multi generational burden. 12% of Haitians, 1.7 million people, now live in the United States. Between 450 and 550,000 entered under the Biden admin's open border policy. 15 to 25% of Haitian economy are remittances from the U.S. At least 53% of Haitians rely on welfare. About 10% of the Somali diaspora live in the United States, 180,000 people. Another 10% in Britain, 12% in Europe. Remittances to Somali were 1.7 billion. 40% of families in Somalia are receiving money from remittances. Western taxpayers are funding 17 to 20% of Somalia's GDP. Okay. So I think that's all I had copied for that. So this is quote unquote the global economy. This is globalism at work. This is the creation of a new Tower of Babel. They are consolidating all of what they're doing is they're lowering the standards of living for those of us in the West who have worked so hard to build ourselves up, and they are boosting the standards of living for people in other nations by through remittances. And I've heard it called for 100% tax on remittances, and I completely agree. Just take the money back. Just take the money from them. If they're going to send it overseas to prop up foreign nations, take it away. And this doesn't even account for the fact of the amount of money that the United States government sends to these nations as well. This is just remittances. This is just money that cheap labor is taking out of our economy and sending overseas. Now, this is talking about the Mariel boat lift that occurred in 1979 to 1980. So what was happening was Fidel Castro had cut off all immigration out of Cuba. He wanted to keep all the Cubans in Cuba to boost their economy, to improve on their development. So he wasn't allowing Cubans to leave Cuba as refugees. And then Jimmy Carter had come out and he said, we are here declaring a state of emergency in Cuba, and we are calling for the admittance of Cuban and Haitian immigrants into the United States based upon economic disasters. It was a Cold War tactic to kind of bring attention to the humanitarian crisis in Cuba and Haiti at the time. And Fidel Castro said, "Oh, okay. Well, you want to do that? I got an idea." So what Fidel Castro did is he opened up Mariel, the ports in Mariel, and he said, "If you want to leave and go to the United States, you can utilize these ports here in Mariel, and you can go. You're free to go. We're not going to hold you captive any longer. You're free to go." So 125,000 Cubans took advantage of this opportunity. Intermingling within this 125,000 Cubans that were taking advantage of the opportunity and as economic refugees to the United States from Cuba, Castro emptied out prisons, sent murderers, kidnappers, drug dealers, um, child molesters, and also sent over covert operatives to carry out terrorist attacks in the United States. So he intermingled all of these criminals and covert operatives into these boats, these shipments of refugees that were coming from Cuba into Miami in the 80s, and overwhelmed the system, creating havoc in the streets. Large amounts of crime were being carried out by these prisoners that Castro had sent to our shores. Does that sound familiar? It sounds exactly what Donald Trump was accusing Nicolas Maduro of doing in Venezuela, is emptying out the prisons and sending them to the United States. And then he refused to take them back. He was like, no, we're not taking back these. It's a tactic that's used in South American countries in order to destabilize the economy and immigration system and other institutions and law enforcement capabilities of the United States. It is the way that the communists have determined that they are going to fight against the capitalist system of the United States, because they can't amass enough force and strength to fight us in a shooting war, so they use immigrants as bullets. So in the 90s, seeing at the effectiveness at this method of warfare against the U.S., in the 90s, Fidel Castro started the Sao Paulo Forum in Sao Paulo, Brazil. And you'll see here some of the members of the Sao Paulo Forum. What you don't see here is another key membership or association is the Democratic Socialist of America, is an associate member of the Sao Paulo Forum, a status that is held since 2023. And when you ask about Sao Paulo Forum, me and my slow typing, weaponizing immigration, it'll tell you, well, it doesn't technically do it, but it's accused of doing it, and here's how it is doing it. So the term weaponizing immigration in the context of the Sao Paulo Forum typically refers to two distinct perspectives, critical allegations from conservative analysts, and the forum's own official stances on migration as a form of resistance against neoliberalism. Allegations of weaponized migration. Critics and conservative think tanks frequently argue that the Sao Paulo Forum uses migration as a tool of hybrid warfare to destabilize liberal democracies, particularly the United States, like the Cubans did in the late 70s, early 80s. Targeted immigration. Some reports allege that the forum coordinates targeted immigration to influence political division in the West. Geopolitical leverage. Critics point to historical examples from member state leadership, such as Cuba's use of mass migration, the Mariel boat lift, to extract policy concessions or remove domestic dissent. Reconquista narratives. Recent political commentary in 2026 has characterized the forum as a cartel attempting to regain territory or influence in the U.S. through mass migration. We'll talk about Reconquista here in a minute. The forum's official stance: the Sao Paulo Forum frames migration not as a weapon, but as a human rights issue caused by external forces. Critique of neoliberalism. The forum's 2023 final declaration argued that migration is deepened by the harmful effects of neoliberalism, forcing people to abandon their land in search of survival. The right to migrate. FSP promotes the right to migrate with rights and calls for the protection of migrants across origin, transition, and destination countries, Opposition to sanctions. The forum argues that U.S. economic blockades and sanctions against members like Cuba and Venezuela are the primary drivers of regional displacement. All DSA talking points, if you're not aware. The role of affiliate organizations. The DSA. And as an associate member, the Democratic Socialists of America aligns with the forum's humanitarian framing. Open borders. DSA advocacy often includes calls for open borders and the abolition of ICE, framing these as morally just responses to U.S. imperialism. Foreign agent allegations. In February 2026, some U.S. reports suggested that the DSA's coordination with the forum warrants investigation under the Foreign Agents Registration Act, FARA, alleging their immigration advocacy aligns too closely with the interests of governments in Venezuela and Cuba. Regional context in 2026. In early 2026, member countries like Brazil have continued to implement progressive migration policies, such as a unified humanitarian visa framework and a refusal to criminalize unauthorized entry. This open door approach is often cited by the forum as a model of international solidarity in contrast to more restrictive northern policies. All right. So let's get in with, let's go into the Reconquista. The Reconquista, how Mexico is weaponizing illegal immigration to punish the United States. Okay. These are excerpts from the book, The Invisible Coup, How American Elites and Foreign Powers Use Immigration as a Weapon, written by Peter Schweitzer. I'm about halfway done with this book. It's infuriating and also very educational. In February 2023, Jose Gerardo Rodolfo Fernandez Noronha. How many names do these fucking people need? A member of the Mexican parliament for President Claudia Sheinbaum's ruling Morena party stood on the floor of the Congreso de la Union and calmly declared that California, Texas, and New Mexico were, among other parcels, occupied territories. He went on to say that Mexico should review the dispossession and once again demand the recovery of these territories from America. These outlandish statements certainly did not hurt his career. In fact, they helped him. A year and a half later, he was elected president of the Mexican Senate. Noronha is not alone. Many pillars of the Mexican elite embraced the notion of reconquista, the reconquest of the land ceded to the United States by Mexico during the 1848 Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, achieved through mass migration and political action. There are many in positions of power who share some version of that vision. While they may or may not mean the literal territorial rejoining of those territories with Mexico, that very much mean the cultural and political detachment of the American Southwest from the U.S. and transforming it to resemble Mexican civilization. And if you go to some areas, it does. It's identical. They hope to accomplish this task by mass migration, preventing the assimilation of migrants in the United States to the American way of life, and organizing them into a political force for Mexico's benefit. With the help or powerful forces inside the United States, they are well on their way. Mexico's political elite are shockingly open about it. In 2017, Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, popularly known as AMLO, then of Mexico's president and Scheinbaum's mentor, was walking outside one night surrounded by a cluster of reporters. They were furiously peppering him with questions. One asked him about the mass of migrants who were heading north. AMLO declared that Mexicans living in the United States are not alone, that we will support you. We will always support each other. And how are they doing that? Let me see if I can find this. Think that, no. No, that's not it. Let's see. Is that it? Yes. Okay. So we'll go back to that article here in a minute. But here, Rosella Suarez is a congresswoman in Mexico, in Michoacan, and she lives in Chicago. Other diputados, deputies, various positions in Congress in Mexico for various states in Mexico live within the borders of the United States. They are fighting for immigrant rights, advocating for the rights of Mexicans living in the U.S., social welfare, pushing for integration into social programs for returning citizens, community engagement, connecting with Mexican communities in the U.S. to address their needs. And there is an article, if I go back, close this out, this article here, boom, will tell you about the Mexico solidarity, serving Mexico in the U.S. Rosa, Rosalia and the five, let me see. So many Mexicans have spent years living and working in both Mexico and the U.S. Mexican Congresswoman Rosalia Suarez is one of these. Her feet are wide apart, one in Michoacan, one in Chicago, and like others, she wants no country to force her to choose one or the other. Rosalia and the five diputadas, or and one senator, one senator who live in the U.S. have double consciousness and double duty. They travel to Mexico when the Mexican Congress is in session, but their homes are in San Diego, Chicago, Los Angeles, and more. Their passion and commitment is to serve both constituencies. As a Mexican in the U.S., you may be documented at some times, undocumented at others. While in the U.S., Rosalia fought for all immigrant workers to have the same rights as other workers. As a Mexican congresswoman, she advocates for U.S. Mexicans to be integrated into social welfare programs and given a fresh start if they return. Today, the U.S. and Mexico governments could not differ more starkly in their attitudes toward people with roots in both countries. Since the Morena Revolution in 2018, the Mexican government recognizes the vital role played by the millions of their citizens who live in the U.S. They call them heroes and heroines for their sacrifice and their contributions to both countries' economies. Trump calls them thugs and rapists. Some of them are. In this environment, what can be done? A lot. That is the hope of Rosalia and her fellow diputados or diputados. If they do their work with creativity and care, they may have feet in two countries, but their hearts unite the people and the places they love. I didn't set foot in the U.S. until 2013. My Mexican boyfriend was moving back to Chicago, his city of birth, and I came too, right out of college. I first had a tourist visa, but then I decided to study English in the U.S., so I got a student visa. In 2019, we got married. I got a work permit, and I was in the process of getting permanent status. After a 9-year relationship and 4-year marriage, I realized my husband was manipulative and abusive, and I said, enough. When my husband kicked me out of the house, I did not go to the police, but I didn't know the importance of reporting domestic violence, so I didn't file a report. I was afraid to tell them anything. Instead of leaving the house, I should have called and waited for the police because their report would be evidence. Without evidence, the immigration case gets complicated, and that's why migrant women are so vulnerable in abuse cases. In 2023, we separated. At first, I kept my social security number and my work permit, but on returning to the U.S. after a trip to Mexico, Customs took away my residency permit. I'm still stuck in the visa machine waiting for my status to get resolved. I've moved back to Mexico, but still have my apartment and car in Chicago. Over 12 years going back and forth to Mexico, but living mostly in the U.S., I've been documented and undocumented. I've lived with constant uncertainty. In Chicago, I worked as a waitress and bartender, a cashier, and a Spanish teacher. I was considered an essential worker during the COVID pandemic. Essential, meaning we had to be at work and had no right to be sick. Yeah, yeah. Go back to Mexico, lady. In 2023, I got a job as a mental health technician to the Chicago. Sounds like you need a mental health technician. My home state is Michoacan, where I was in the Morena social movement in 2014 when the activists decided to make it an official political party. I was among the first members in my city. I got experience working with the party secretary of youth and campaigning for an alderman running on the Morena ticket. At the end of the 2015 elections, I went back to Chicago. I wanted to find Morena in the U.S. and did find it with progressive leaders like Alfonso Seva and Jorge Mujica in the organization Arize Chicago. Oh, Arise. No, it's Arize because they're Mexican, right? I don't know. Arise, Arize, whatever. Odele, which organizes working class immigrants to fight injustice. After AMLO became president, Mexicans in the U.S. were saying, what can we do? We want a 4T in the U.S. too. I don't know what the hell that means. The 4T was Mexico President Lopez Obrador's fourth transformation project. Oh, okay. Claudia Scheinbaum inspired me hugely when she was elected president in 2024. At her inauguration, she said, it's time for women. I say we're arriving because I'm not arriving on my own. All women are arriving. That was electric. So I've been an activist and I've experienced the problems ordinary people in my community also face. This makes me a good representative. President Trump's big, beautiful bill says the U.S. will start charging a 1% tax on remittances. That's not enough. This is unfair because we've already paid income tax on this money. Who cares? We can't change U.S. laws, but Mexico created a new use for a government issued bank card called Finabian, which can handle both dollars and pesos. Beginning January 1st, Mexicans in the U.S. can use it to send money directly to Mexico and avoid the new tax. They can also skip Western Union's high fees. We're designing tools that other countries can copy too. Furthermore, when a Mexican citizen dies in the United States, the Mexican government, depending on the citizen's economic status, of course, will pay up to $1,300 to transfer the body to Mexico for burial. We take care of people even after they die. Okay. Anyway, so that gives you an idea of what these politicians in America, that are Mexican politicians in America, are doing and what they're working on. They're working on undermining American law by utilizing Mexican law. Okay. So, do you think that the Mexicans are reconquering our lands again? One reporter shouted from the scrum. We Mexicans are reconquering our lands again, AMLO responded with a smile. Yes, especially because the human rights of migrant workers must be respected. For Mexico's elite, mass migration is not just an economic reality, and the United States is not just a friendly neighbor with which it occasionally clashes. Instead, the U.S. is a rival civilization with opposing values that must be subverted. As Jorge Nuno Jimenez, a prominent Mexican academic who regularly attends the United Nations conference, stated in 2024, mass migration is causing the demographic reconquest in areas that the Americans had forcibly taken from Mexico. Assimilation is not the preferred path of the Mexican government, which works diligently to ensure other countless migrants don't follow suit. Alberto Vieira Gomez, the founding director of the Mexican news agency, Agencia Mexicana de Noticias, opined in a 2023 article that migrants are quietly carrying out a reconquest of the territories the U.S. took from us in 1848. He warned that once the Americans figured out what was going on, migrants should watch out for Yankee fundamentalism, noting that the reconquest, you damn Yankees up there, you New Yorkers and Bostonians, y'all need to stop it with your fundamentalism. Noting that the conquest of the Aztec territory, which doesn't extend into Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, or California, there were no Aztecs or Mayans in those areas or regions, but whatever. And the day the gringos realize this diabolical fundamentalism will become macabre. In 2025, Octavio Paredes Lopez, the former president of the Mexican Academy of Sciences, cheered on subversive migration to the United States. We are witnessing the greatest peaceful and silent reconquest of our identity that history has ever recorded, he proclaimed. Reconquista does not necessitate a change in governance or ownership. In the minds of many Mexican leaders, the cultural and political weapon presented by mass migration into the United States is enough to fundamentally transform it. In July 1997, Mexican President Ernesto Zedillo traveled to Chicago to address the National Council of La Raza, a nonprofit Hispanic organization in the U.S. with considerable political power. Founded in 1968, La Raza, the race, began as a militant organization committed to Latino liberation. In 2017, the name was changed to Unidos US. Domestic activist organizations like this loom large in Mexico's subversive strategy. I have proudly proclaimed that the Mexican nation extends beyond the terribly enclosed the ter- I'm sorry, in, extends beyond the territory enclosed by its borders. You can just proclaim it. Zedillo told La Raza members to cheers in the American heartland, and that Mexican migrants are a very important part of it. And, and Zedillo meant it. The Mexican government amended the Constitution that year to allow Mexicans in the United States who had received their American citizenship to remain Mexican citizens. And that's why U.S. should end dual citizenship. If you want to be a citizen of the U.S., you have to give up your citizenship of any other nation. As one Mexican congressman explained, it signifies the recognition that nations are more than concrete, special territorial resources. Belonging to Mexico is fixed in bonds of a cultural and spiritual order, in customs, aspirations, and convictions that today are the essence of a universally recognized civilization. With millions of Mexicans having migrated to the U.S. before the turn of the millennium, the pro Mexican ethos was now a growing force inside the United States. After the U.S. passed a law in 1996 to limit illegal immigration, President Zedillo expressed his belief that the U.S. government does not actually have full sovereignty over Mexicans living in the country. We will not tolerate foreign forces dictating and enacting laws on Mexicans, he said, the foreign forces being the U.S. federal government. All right. There you go. I would suggest go get this book. What's it called again? The Invisible Coup: How American Elites and Foreign Powers Use Immigration as a Weapon, and read up on all that stuff. Oh, and that's, I don't know if we're going to get to that. We're definitely going to do that tonight. Okay. So, as pathways to freedom have narrowed in immigration courts across the United States, a record number of detainees are giving up their cases and voluntarily leaving the country. So the courts are finally getting um, coming to terms with the fact that they're not going to be able to block existing laws anymore. Two Navy ships laden with humanitarian aid dock in Cuba as U.S. blockade sparks outrage. So here, the Mexican government is sending aid to Cuba in order to thwart American foreign policy because ultimately they are part of the Sao Paulo Forum and want illegal immigration into the U.S. And they believe in what the Cuban government is doing as far as a communist um, regime goes. So Mexico, Brazil, Nicaragua, Cuba, Venezuela all stand with illegal immigrants against the United States, and they want to see the United States fall. We might get to that. We'll probably get to that. This is China. Fed's buses. Okay. Yeah. So I guess we're ready to get into China here. Well, let's go here first. Let's hear what Representative Gene Wu, a Democrat from Texas, has to say. We'll go ahead and rewind this all the way back. Here we go. Go full screen here. Not like it's necessary to go full screen, but we went full screen. Well, are you not going to play now? You're just going to be retarded? You were just playing a second ago. Hmm. All right. Well, let's go. Let's go here then. Floodgates closed. 8 in 10 asylum seekers now booted by judges as Trump attempts to restore borders. Nearly 80% of migrants seeking asylum in the U.S. were sent packing in the last quarter as immigration judges take a tougher line under the Trump administration, which has made it a priority to restore the border. In the same span, there's been an accompanying spike in deportations. In December, there were 38,215 illegal migrants given the boot, nearly double the 19,265 in December of 2023 under President Joe Biden, and 53% more than the 24,979 in December 2024, according to data compiled by Syracuse University. So we're starting to get the increase in deportations. Here, I copied this. So deportations in 2025, there are approximately 622,000 individuals deported by the end of 2025. There were 1,900,000 self-deportations. There were 63,730 or 65,735 migrants still in ICE detention as of December of 2025. So you're looking at about 2.5 million, so 2.5 million deportations, whether self-deported or deported by, oh shit, I just deleted something, by Donald Trump. What is this? Oh, so what did I delete? I don't know what I deleted. Shit. Oh well. Why is this still fucking doing this? Is this thing gonna play? I don't understand. Let's try. Let's try rebooting that. Let's see.
I always tell people the day the Latino, African American, Asian, and other communities realize that they share the same oppressor is the day we start winning. Because we are the majority in this country now. We have the ability to take over this country and to do what is needed for everyone and to make things fair. But the problem is our communities are divided. They're completely divided. And I talk about this, I always.
So they're going to continue to tell you that all this stuff I read to you from Peter Schweitzer is a complete conspiracy theory. They're going to continue to tell you that the Great Replacement is just a conspiracy theory. But then we have this report from News Nation. This one I will definitely.
Is a beautiful part of California. Quiet suburbs, nearly perfect climate, but there's something secret here involving pregnant Chinese women. At one of the upscale apartments, federal agents swarm the building. It's one of the many Chinese baby tourism busts in the area, what neighbors call baby farms in normally quiet suburban neighborhoods.
I see them every once in a while and then I don't see them again.
Are they pregnant? Ever?
Yes. Yes.
How many in one house?
Maybe like 7 to 10, I would say.
7 pregnant women all in one house.
Well, so it was just like a regular house, like maybe like a 3-bedroom house, and then out of nowhere, and it's right on the corner.
The busts date back a decade, targeting Chinese women who fly into the United States on tourism visas midway through their pregnancies to have their babies on U.S. soil, so the babies are U.S. citizens. Illegal Chinese birthing agencies organized the trips, charging upwards of $100,000.
These were, criminal enterprises in a very true sense that operated both here in the United States with also employees in China who would recruit.
And would they just show up to the hospital when they were ready to have the baby?
Yeah, the organizers here had contacts at hospitals, knew the facilities where they should ultimately go and have that child, because this was an industry. The organizers of these schemes were responsible for birth tourism of thousands of babies. So they had a system in place.
Acting U.S. Attorney Joseph McNally says that system birthed 30
Don't you do that.
into U.S. citizenship. A lot of these places just sort of blend in. This is a motel in Orange County where the Chinese pregnant women would come and stay for months until giving birth. I rented a room at this motel.
Yeah, sure. I'm gonna get some cash.
Okay. It looked pretty empty. We didn't find anything strange in the room, but we did see this picture covering Chinese lettering. and neighbors say pregnant Chinese women have come and gone for years.
This next order relates to the definition of birthright citizenship.
In January, President Trump signed a controversial executive order trying to end birthright citizenship.
It's a big one.
It's an uphill battle and requires changing the Constitution. But it sparked a discussion that's exposed something even more shocking that came up at a congressional hearing last month.
Countries are now using international surrogacy programs to rent wombs in America.
You heard that right, rent-a-wombs, something the Heritage Foundation calls California's new handmaid's tale. Chinese parents implant their egg and sperm into an American woman's womb. When the Chinese babies are born from the American woman, they're automatically U.S. citizens, but immediately return home to China. Acting U.S. Attorney McNally says it's not illegal, but it's a grave concern. What happens in 20 years? Is there any concern that they could become spies, that the Chinese government could use them somehow because they'll have the American passport?
Congress people,
Anytime that
president
has a U.S. passport,
who knows?
It means that they have access to the United States. I'll give you the example. Child's born in Irvine in 2015, goes back and ultimately joins the Chinese military at age 20, having a U.S. passport. That provides a real national security asset to China and a real problem to the United States.
I went to the Egg Donor and Surrogacy Institute in Beverly Hills. At one point, 90% of their clients were Chinese.
Obviously, it's a blessing.
Owner Parham Zar says clients pay about $200,000 for the surrogacy process to use American wombs.
Is that ever a concern?
Not at all. And so, it's a misnomer and misunderstanding within this field that people are coming here just to have a baby to be a U.S. citizen.
But I haven't met anybody who had any nefarious intentions of having a child.
How do you know their
intentions? It takes
intentions?
a lot of time, effort, energy, and money to go through this process.
A controversial process that Republican Congresswoman Harriet Hageman of Wyoming is leading an effort to stop.
I found it to be incredibly strange and dystopian. I just think that we need to be having a national
dystopian? Look at the
dialogue
pain
as
on
to
that
whether we
lady's
think that
face.
this is ethical, whether we think that this
It's
is
like
appropriate,
straight out of the
whether
Fifth
we should
Element.
be interpreting our own laws to allow for the buying and selling of children, essentially, or the buying and selling of wombs.
And interestingly, Elizabeth, surrogacy is illegal in China. I heard a very, very sad story during COVID when the travel restrictions were in place. The American women were giving birth to these Chinese babies, but the Chinese parents could not come back over to America because of the restrictions. So the babies were born without parents, and there were many of them just in these facilities with babysitters watching them for weeks and some.
All right. So you get the point of that story. So it's very sad, Brian. Thank you for the story. And here's another story from Tony Segura. One Chinese man has over 100 American citizen children through paid surrogates. The kids were born here, immediately shipped to China, and raised under the CCP. 107 Chinese-owned surrogacy companies operate in Southern California alone. The federal government has no idea how many total cases exist. Here's how the operation works. Rich Chinese men linked to the CCP pay American women $50,000 to carry their child. Chinese sperm, American surrogate, U.S. birth certificate, baby goes straight back to China. Those kids can eventually vote in our elections, infiltrate our colleges, universities, corporations, and government.
Chinese elites who are donating their sperm. They find a carrier or a woman in the United States to give birth to their child. Again, the child is given birth in the United States. It becomes a U.S. citizen. The Wall Street Journal found a couple of weeks ago Chinese elite that had over 100 children that were born this way. Again, the federal government has no idea of the numbers. We looked at just Southern California, and there we found, Laura, 107 Chinese-owned surrogacy companies in just Southern California.
All right. So we have an issue with Chinese surrogacy. We have an issue with the Chinese coming over to the U.S., buying up property. Whether it be single family homes or whether it be farmland. And And we have an issue with our immigration process, all in all. And then, and Marco Rubio comes out and he's telling people like the old world's over.
This is an important topic. My third time, twice as Secretary of State, while a lot of members of Congress there, so we'll see them tomorrow as well. So it's important, and I think it's at a defining moment. And I refer you back to even the speech or the statement I gave during my nomination hearing, Secretary of State. The world is changing very fast right in front of us. The old world is gone, frankly, the world I grew up in, and we live in a new era of geopolitics, and it's going to require all of us to sort of re-examine what that looks like and what our role is going to be. And we've had many of these conversations in private with many of our allies. They are our allies. And we need to continue to have those conversations. And I think Saturday, hopefully, and the meetings we'll have there will move us in that direction.
Do you think Greenland will be an issue, or are you going to talk about it, or is that done deal?
Greenland?
Yeah, Greenland.
Oh, I'm sure somebody will raise it.
I know. Sure.
We're working on that. We feel good about it.
Do you expect to meet with President Zelensky when you're there?
I think so. I think he's going to be there, and there's a chance to see him. I believe it's on my schedule. I'm not 100% sure.
What do you think about the Russian bombardment during all of this cold? They're continuing.
It's terrible. It's a war. That's why we want the war to end.
People are suffering.
So slimy. It's the coldest time of year. Unimaginable suffering. That's the problem in war. That's why wars are bad, and that's why we've worked so hard for over a year now to try to bring this war to the end.
Why the meeting with Orban? Are you looking to help him in the polls?
Sorry?
Meeting to Orban.
Well, the president said he's very supportive of him, and so are we. But obviously, we were going to do that visit as a bilateral visit. They came to U.S. here late last year. We told them that when I had an opportunity, I would visit, and this is the best opportunity. It's very close by. We're also going to go by Slovakia, which is we met with them at the end of last year in Florida, early this year to get in the holidays. So we also told them we'd go by. So it just makes sense to sort of stack it onto this trip.
So this is going to be your third transatlantic trip last week.
It is?
Oh, it's the third time crossing.
Yeah, that's right. Well, then I got four times back, yeah.
So is there a message here for Europe, or is it just basically, well, I went to the Olympics and now I'm doing it?
Message?
To Europe.
Well, I don't know, guys. I mean, I didn't schedule the Olympics and I didn't schedule Munich. They're on our schedule. You know, that those are pre-existing events. We went to both. Europe's important to us. We're very tightly linked to what the close people in this country think trace both either their cultural or their personal heritage back to Europe. So we're deeply tied to Europe, and that future of the goal is in length that will continue to be. So we just got to talk about what that future looks like. All right? All right, guys?
Russia. I'm sorry.
I'm not going to Russia this time.
Are you going to hopefully and do that in Slovakia to stop buying Russian?
Well, we'll have those conversations without talking about what needs to happen. Yeah, I'm not going to get into what we're going to say about meetings, but more than anything else, these are the countries that are.
All right, this isn't the one I thought it was. Let me see. Let me see if I can bring this back up because there was, yeah, this is the one. I'm sorry, guys. Interesting to hear his plans are.
I think they want honesty. They want to know where we're going, where we'd like to go, where we'd like to go with them. So that's our hope. It's an important conference. My third time, twice as Secretary of State. Well, a lot of members of Congress there, so as well. I'll see them tomorrow as well. So it's important, and I think it's at a defining moment. And I refer you back to even the speech or the statement I gave during my nomination hearing as Secretary of State. The world is changing very fast right in front of us. The old world is gone, frankly, the world I grew up in, and we live in a new era in geopolitics, and it's going to require all of us to sort of re-examine what that looks like and what our role is going to be.
So there it is. The old world is gone. It's a new era of geopolitics, and it's up to all of us to determine what our role is going to be. We're gonna finish off watching this speech because I enjoyed listening to the speech. There are some things in there that kind of made me go, oh no, not that. But ultimately, I thought it was a decent speech. What is that? But I want to go here first, and we're not gonna listen to this entire thing, but there are parts of this I want y'all to hear because I found this very interesting. This is from the World Government Summit a couple of weeks ago. Actually, it says it's 9 days ago. This is Liz Truss from the United Kingdom being interviewed.
The Right Honourable Liz Truss is the former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom.
Oh, come on.
Now, since leaving office, she has remained a polarising figure on markets and economic policy, known for her clear and unapologetic views on how governments should approach growth. She joins us for a special discussion here at the World Government Summit. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Secretary Truss to the stage. Thank you very much for joining us. Now, I know you've flown in this morning, so thank you very much. What a pleasure to welcome you here at the World Government Summit. Now, lots of things to ask you today about where the world is sitting. But for a moment, let us quickly address the elephant in the room, because, of course, your leadership was, of course, defined by the rather disastrous mini-budget of 2022. We saw markets react not very well to that. So as we gather here today, and we have policymakers, government figures, leading CEOs in the room today. Tell me, Secretary Truss, why do you feel...
First of all, it's not Secretary.
Okay.
But the line that you are repeating is essentially a false narrative about what happened. And what actually happened was Britain's pension market had been very badly regulated. We had a lot of pension funds that were exposed to rises in interest rates. What was happening in 2022, as well as very high energy prices, we also had interest rates rising across the world, including in America, including Japan, and including in Europe. The reason that there was a spike in gilts in 2022, and the Bank of England later confirmed this in a report they issued in 2024, was because of the LDI crisis. And the night before we announced the mini-budget, which was a package of measures to get growth going in the British economy, the Bank of England announced the sale of £40 billion worth of gilts, which kind of set off a chain reaction. And what has happened subsequently, and in fact, the Wall Street Journal produced a documentary about this called The Prime Minister versus the Blob, and in which they described the British press as incurious and unserious. And I think we have a serious problem in Britain that our economic institutions have failed the country for the last 30 years. We've had economic stagnation, we've had quantitative easing, which led to a huge rise in asset prices. It's pushed young people out of the housing market, but the economic establishment does not want to acknowledge their failings. So they like to point the finger at me, but you can look at all the evidence about what's caused Britain's stagnation. The real reasons: high taxes, high regulations, some of the highest energy prices in the world thanks to not using our oil and gas reserves and instead pursuing net zero policies that have turned out to be economically suicidal. And you can conduct a comparison with the United States of America. So in the year 2000, British GDP per capita was almost the same as the United States of America. By the year 2025, their GDP is 50% higher per capita. Why is that? Well, their energy prices are a quarter what they are in the UK. So that doesn't just benefit traditional manufacturing industries, it also benefits industries like AI, like crypto, that are very energy intensive. So we have had a failing economic policy for a long time. I tried to change that in 2022 by getting rid of the windfall tax on oil and gas, by getting on with fracking, by not raising corporation tax. And one of the reasons there are so many British people in Dubai now is because our taxes are so high. And if you look at what has happened, and we've had the counterfactual of what has happened since the mini-budget wasn't implemented, and it wasn't implemented because there was essentially rebellion by the British economic institutions, every single metric has got worse. Well, so gilt prices have been worse under this Labour government. Debt is higher, unemployment is higher, growth is lower. You know, it's pretty hard to see what has improved as a result of implementing more of the same policies.
And I want to ask you your thoughts on net zero and the UK as a whole in just a moment. But first, let's talk a little bit about where we are in the world today. Start of 2026, as we come here together, of course, there's a number of geopolitical crises around the world. The war in Ukraine is still continuing. The crisis in Gaza still remains to be seen. And against the backdrop of this, we're also seeing tensions between the US and Iran, and the fact that governments are continuing to roll over large amounts of debt at high interest rates. We're seeing Japan, who's got snap elections later this week. So with your understanding of the world economy today, where would you say is the greatest economic risk that governments are still underestimating today?
Well, I would say it's a debt crisis. And we can see this in the UK. Our debt is almost 100% of GDP. We can see it in France. They are in very serious trouble. We can see it in the United States of America. We can see it in Japan, where, again, there is serious trouble. What is the problem? Well, basically, a lot of the Western economies, particularly Western Europe, have been living beyond their means. We have not been generating the economic growth. We have not been generating the productive capacity. Instead, we've been consuming, and we've grown in debt. And to me, the two people who are trying to take this on, actually there's three people who are trying to take this on. One is Donald Trump. He is trying to shift the American economy from consumption to production. He's trying to reindustrialize, reshore, and deal with the massive mistake of allowing China to essentially become the outsourced vehicle for American manufacturing. Javier Milei is again trying to outrun these factors in Argentina by radically cutting the size of the state and deregulating. And Sanai Takaichi is trying to take this on in Japan, which is a massive challenge. But you know, what I was trying to do in 2022, and this is the challenge for elected politicians, is it's very, very difficult to cut the size of the state in the short term. First of all, because of the political pressure. And we can see.
And what they said ultimately in in that documentary, The Prime Minister versus the Blob, what they ultimately said was, what they ultimately said was, that the reason that she had so much issue is because she tried to move too quickly and she tried to do it too fast. And when you look at like Trump, he's a lot of people are on Trump about not moving fast enough, not decoupling from Israel quick enough, being too hasty in decoupling from from NATO and from the UN. And I think he's making, I mean, I can only guess, but I think he's making some calculations within his mind on how he's going about this in expectations that JD Vance will come after him. I don't know. I think maybe because of the size and location of Israel, he sees them as less of a threat to the U.S. or more necessary to be coupled to at the moment. I don't know why. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. But he's much more comfortable with taking on Europe and the European leaders. Maybe that's because he's more familiar with them because of doing business with them over the years, and understands their economies more than he understands the Middle East. Maybe he just feels like the U.S. has to maintain some sort of foothold in the Middle East, and until and by working out the Abraham Accords, that he's working out a new type of UN for Middle Eastern policy, similar to what he's trying to do with this board of peace and stuff like that. I don't really quite get his thinking when it comes to Israel. So don't accuse me of excusing his methods with Israel. I know a lot of people want to make it simple and just say Israel owns him, but I don't think it's quite that simple. I think there's more to his thought process and the way that he interacts with these other nations and nations leaders that I haven't quite figured out why he treats some way and others another. The left will just, oh, well, he's a bully, and so he's looking for the weak ones that he can push around, and the strong ones he kowtows to or whatever. I don't buy that either. I'm kind of like, there seems to be a method to his madness in all areas. I mean, if you look at the debt clock, it is slowed substantially. It should have hit like 38.7 trillion like 3 weeks ago. And as of Friday, it was still at 38.68 trillion. And it had been at 38.68 trillion, going up steadily, but slower. And it had been in that position for like over a week. And you could see the tariff revenue rising beneath that. So I really believe there is a method to his madness. I just can't figure it out. Another thing I'll give him a lot of credit for is this. The only place I could pull it up was and read the entire article was Red State, but it's generally almost the exact same article that was published in the Wall Street Journal. Federal employment at lowest point since LBJ era as Doge reductions take hold. So if you look here, the number of federal government employees is now at its lowest level in 50 plus years, dropped off a cliff after Trump was elected. So that's that there. For a long time, the working assumption in Washington was that the federal government only grows, agencies expand, programs multiply, headcounts inch upward year after year, blah, blah, blah. Where does it say? Okay, so Defense and Veteran Affairs, two of the largest federal employees, saw tens of thousands depart. Health and Human Services to reduce its workforce from 82,000 to 62,000. USAID staffing drop was steep from 4,800 to just 378. The Department of Education trimmed 1,700 positions, landing at 2,500 employees. It's at its lowest point since 1966. I think both 1966 and today, the number of federal employees was at 2.1 million. So if you look at the monthly employment update from December 2025 to January 2026, non-farm payroll employment increased by 130,000 to 158.63 million. Private sector payroll employment increased by 172,000 to 135.33 million. Government payroll employment decreased by 42,000 to 23.3 million. The headline unemployment rate decreased by 0.1% points to 4.3%. The broadest measure of unemployment decreased by 0.4 percentage points to 8%. The labor force participation rate increased by 0.1% to 62.5%. From January 2025 to January 2026, for all employees on private non-farm payrolls, average nominal weekly earnings increased 4.32%. Average nominal hourly earnings increased by 3.71%. Production and non-supervisory employees on private non-farm payrolls average weekly earnings increased by 4.39%. Average nominally hourly earnings increased by 3.77%. You see in January 2023 how low the unemployment rate had gotten, and then it had started rising again going into 2025, and now it's dropping again. From December 2025 to January 2026, the best performing sectors were private education and health services and professional and business services. The worst performing sectors were federal government and financial activities. Let's fucking go. I like that. From January 2025 to January 2026, the best performing sectors were private education and health services and leisure and hospitality. The worst performing sectors were federal government and trade, transportation, and utilities. Oof. And then it gets into the whole, all the tables and metrics and all that good jazz. But so it looks like in a lot of ways we're on the right path, despite, well, maybe because of the deportation of so many illegals and refugees in this country, then we're seeing the pay rise, the incomes increase. We're seeing unemployment decrease. So this is a good thing. And hopefully this keeps up. And this is what Liz Truss was talking about. Trump's trying to turn the U.S. from a consumer economy to a productive economy. And that's a good thing. And, we can have all our issues in the world with the way that Trump wants to do things. But I think ultimately that's really a good thing. Another thing we got to look at here, the foreign censorship threat, part 2, Europe's decade-long campaign to censor the global internet and how it harms American speech in the United States. Executive summary. The Committee on the Judiciary of the U.S. House of Representatives is investigating how and to what extent foreign laws, regulations, and judicial orders compel, coerce, or influence companies to censor speech in the United States. As part of this oversight, the committee has issued document subpoenas to 10 technology companies, requiring them to produce communications with foreign governments, including the European Commission and European Union, member states regarding content moderation. In July 2025, the committee published a report detailing how the European Commission, the executive arm of the EU, weaponizes the Digital Services Act, DSA, a law regulating online speech to impose global online censorship requirements on political speech, humor, and satire. Since then, pursuant to subpoena, technology companies have produced to the committee thousands of internal documents and communications with the European Commission. These documents show the extent and success of the European Commission's global censorship campaign. The European Commission, in a comprehensive decade-long effort, has successfully pressured social media platforms to change their global content moderation rules, thereby directly infringing on Americans' online speech in the United States. Though often framed as combating so-called hate speech or disinformation, the European Commission worked to censor true information and political speech about some of the most important policy debates in recent history, including the COVID-19 pandemic, mass migration, and transgender issues. After 10 years, the European Commission has established sufficient control of global online speech to comprehensively suppress narratives that threaten the European Commission's power. Prior to the committee's subpoenas, these efforts largely occurred in secret. Now the European Commission's efforts have come to light for the first time, informing the committee on legislative steps it can take to protect American free speech online. And this is something that has been coming up for quite a while. Here we have this article that popped up. When was this? In 2024, August of 2024, UK police commissioner threatens to extradite jail US citizens over online post. We'll come after you. London's Metropolitan Police Chief warned that officials will not only be cracking down on British citizens for commentary on the riots in the UK, but on American citizens as well. We will throw the full force of the law at people, and whether you're in this country committing crimes on the streets or committing crimes from further afield online, we will come after you, Metropolitan Police Commissioner Sir Mark Rowley told Sky News. And then we had that issue late last year where that comedian was locked up whenever he landed in the UK, and he was arrested for comments he made on X while in the US about transgenders and made jokes. So I think it was Wyoming is doing trying to pass the Granted Act. Preston Byrne, a legal fellow of the Adam Smith Institute who does our legal representation in the U.S., is proposing the Granite Act, guaranteeing rights against novel international tyranny and extortion. It could significantly shift the landscape of free speech, especially on U.S.-based tech platforms, if it becomes law. The Granite Act aims to allow U.S. persons, individuals, or companies to sue foreign governments or regulators that attempt to impose censorship or content moderation rules on them. Under the bill, foreign censorship enforcement would lose sovereign immunity in U.S. courts. The bill sets up a private right of action. If a foreign regulator attempts to force a U.S.-based platform or user to moderate or remove content, the affected party can bring a civil lawsuit for damages, statutory damages, treble damages, or a share of revenue, and seek injunctive relief. It also prohibits state cooperation in states that adopt it with foreign censorship enforcement, meaning local authorities couldn't help foreign regulators apply their laws to U.S. entities. Its purpose is to shield U.S. platforms from foreign speech laws. If passed at federal or widely adopted at state level, it could protect U.S.-based tech companies from legal pressure by foreign governments seeking to force them to comply with the foreign country's content or online safety laws. That means platforms might feel more confident hosting speech that would be legal in the U.S., even if disallowed overseas. And I mean, it continues. It would reduce external censorship. The aim is to protect user rights under U.S. free speech norms. The act reinforces the principle that U.S. free speech protection under the First Amendment should govern what happens on U.S. servers, regardless of foreign laws. If the Granite Act becomes law, it might make U.S.-based platforms less vulnerable to foreign attempts to apply censorship standards, which many see as a win for free expression globally, or at least for Americans. The protections are primarily for U.S.-based entities or users. So what we're looking at here is we're looking at global communists and global capitalists, like whether it's the World Economic Forum, the Democratic Socialists of America, that are working basically in congruency together in order to globalize the American way of life. And you know, it's like I said a while back, multiculturalism is it necessitates authoritarianism, because when you bring in tribes of people that don't speak the language, that don't understand the culture, that don't follow the laws, you know, like the Pakistani rape gangs in the UK, you're going to create an atmosphere where the citizens of your country beg for authoritarianism. They beg for the boot of the government to come down on these foreign invaders coming into your nation and changing it dynamically, because your instinct as a parent is to protect your children. It is to protect your wife, to protect your parents, to protect your family, to protect your way of life. And if people are coming in trying to change that way of life, then your instinct is going to be either I have to do something violently and physically to stop what I see happening in front of me at the expense of my freedom, my liberty, or I have to get the government to put the boot down and become an authoritarian, tyrannical structure in which we see more riots and violence throughout the streets of the nation. None of us want to see the authoritarianism, the violence, and the riots throughout the nation. What we want is we want to be able to raise our children productively and protect our children from these vile forces that are intruding into our way of life. We want to be able to give our children a better life than what we have. We want our children to have more opportunities than what we have. And what we see is this collaboration between these globalists, the global capitalists of the WEF and the World Government Summit, along with Davos and many others, working hand in hand with global communist regimes in order to oppress our way of life and uplift the third world. Well, we don't want our way of life oppressed. I don't mind if I would love the third world to come out of the third world and become the first world, but not at the expense of my children. I put it on X before. My children are more important than your children. My point was that I have a preference, and that preference moves out of that window into other windows. It starts with my children, my family, my wife. Then it moves out to my community, my neighbors, my church family, then into the city or the county, then into the state, then from the state into the region, and from the region into the nation, and then from the nation into the Western Hemisphere, and then from the Western Hemisphere into the whole world. But my preference starts at the micro with my own children. God gave me these children to care for and to look after and to give the best opportunity in life to. And I'm not going to negate that responsibility on behalf of some ideological fever dream. Anyway, I'm going to play this Marco Rubio speech. I think it's about 30 minutes long, but I think y'all enjoy it. Well, this one's 15 minutes. Maybe it's only 15 minutes. I thought it was about 30 minutes. Maybe it's only 15 minutes.
I want to know, have you made this mistake with your holster? And by mistake, I mean, did you get a...
No, not that. Skip that. Okay.
We are connected culturally. We want Europe to be strong. We believe that Europe must survive. Because the two great wars of the last century serve for us as history's constant reminder that ultimately our destiny is and will always be intertwined with yours. Because we know that the fate of Europe will never be irrelevant to our own. National security, which this conference is largely about, is not merely a series of technical questions. How much we spend on defense or where, how we deploy it, these are important questions. They are. But they are not the fundamental one. The fundamental question we must answer at the outset is, what exactly are we defending? Because armies do not fight for abstractions. Armies fight for a people. Armies fight for a nation. Armies fight for a way of life. And that is what we are defending. A great civilization that has every reason to be proud of its history, confident of its future, and aims to always be the master of its own economic and political destiny. It was here, in Europe, where the ideas that planted the seeds of liberty that changed the world were born. It was here, in Europe, which gave the world the rule of law, the universities, and the scientific revolution. It was this continent that produced the genius of Mozart and Beethoven, of Dante and Shakespeare, of Michelangelo and Da Vinci, of the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. And this is the place where the vaulted ceilings of the Sistine Chapel and the towering spires of the great cathedral in Cologne, they testify not just to the greatness of our past or to a faith in God that inspired these marvels. They foreshadow the wonders that await us in our future. But only if we are unapologetic in our heritage and proud of this common inheritance can we together begin the work of envisioning and shaping our economic and our political future. Deindustrialization was not inevitable. It was a conscious policy choice, a decades-long economic undertaking that stripped our nations of their wealth, of their productive capacity, and of their independence. And the loss of our supply chain sovereignty was not a function of a prosperous and healthy system of global trade. It was foolish. It was a foolish but voluntary transformation of our economy that left us dependent on others for our needs and dangerously vulnerable to crisis. Mass migration isn't some fringe concern of little consequence. It was and continues to be a crisis which is transforming and destabilizing societies all across the West. Together, we can reindustrialize our economies and rebuild our capacity to defend our people. But the work of this new alliance should not be focused just on military cooperation and reclaiming the industries of the past. It should also be focused on together advancing our mutual interests in new frontiers, unshackling our ingenuity, our creativity, and the dynamic spirit to build a new Western century. Commercial space travel and cutting-edge artificial intelligence, industrial automation and flex manufacturing, creating a Western supply chain for critical minerals not vulnerable to extortion from other powers, and a unified effort to compete for market share in the economies of the global South. Together, we can not only take back control of our own industries and supply chains, we can prosper in the areas that will define the 21st century. But we must also gain control of our national borders. Controlling who and how many people enter our countries, this is not an expression of xenophobia, it is not hate. It is a fundamental act of national sovereignty. And the failure to do so is not just an abdication of one of our most basic duties owed to our people. It is an urgent threat to the fabric of our societies and the survival of our civilization itself. And finally, we can no longer place the so-called global order above the vital interests of our people and our nations. We do not need to abandon the system of international cooperation we authored, and we don't need to dismantle the global institutions of the old order that together we built. But these must be reformed. These must be rebuilt. For example, the United Nations still has tremendous potential to be a tool for good in the world. But we cannot ignore that today, on the most pressing matters before us, it has no answers and has played virtually no role. It could not solve the war in Gaza. Instead, it was American leadership that freed captives from barbarians and brought about a fragile truce. It has not solved the war in Ukraine. It took American leadership in partnership with many of the countries here today just to bring the two sides to the table in search of a still elusive peace. It was powerless to constrain the nuclear program of radical Shia clerics in Tehran. That required 14 bombs dropped with precision from American B-2 bombers. And it was unable to address the threat to our security from a narco-terrorist dictator in Venezuela. Instead, it took American special forces to bring this fugitive to justice. In a perfect world, all of these problems and more would be solved by diplomats and strongly worded resolutions.
Oh, jeez. Let me skip this. Oh, there's the skip. I was on top of it.
Perfect world. And we cannot continue to allow those who blatantly and openly threaten our citizens and endanger our global stability to shield themselves behind abstractions of international law which they themselves routinely violate. This is the path that President Trump and the United States has embarked upon. It is the path we ask you here in Europe to join us on. It is a path we have walked together before and hope to walk together again. For 5 centuries, before the end of the Second World War, the West had been expanding. Its missionaries, its pilgrims, its soldiers, its explorers pouring out from its shores to cross oceans, settle new continents, build vast empires extending out across the globe. But in 1945, for the first time since the age of Columbus, it was contracting. Europe was in ruins. Half of it lived behind an iron curtain, and the rest looked like it would soon follow. The great Western empires had entered into terminal decline, accelerated by godless communist revolutions and by anti-colonial uprisings. that would transform the world and drape the red hammer and sickle across vast swaths of the map in the years to come. Against that backdrop, then as now, many came to believe that the West's age of dominance had come to an end, and that our future was destined to be a faint and feeble echo of our past. But together, our predecessors recognized that decline was a choice, and it was a choice they refused to make. This is what we did together once before, and this is what President Trump and the United States want to do again now, together with you. And this is why we do not want our allies to be weak, because that makes us weaker. We want allies who can defend themselves so that no adversary will ever be tempted to test our collective strength. This is why we do not want our allies to be shackled by guilt and shame. We want allies who are proud of their culture and of their heritage, who understand that we are heirs to the same great and noble civilization, and who together with us are willing and able to defend it. And this is why we do not want allies to rationalize the broken status quo rather than reckon with what is necessary to fix it. For we in America have no interest in being polite and orderly caretakers of the West's managed decline. We do not seek to separate, but to revitalize an old friendship and renew the greatest civilization in human history. What we want is a reinvigorated alliance that recognizes that what has ailed our societies is not just a set of bad policies, but a malaise of hopelessness and complacency. An alliance is the alliance that we want is one that is not paralyzed into inaction by fear. Fear of climate change, fear of war, fear of technology. Instead, we want an alliance that boldly races into the future. And the only fear we have is the fear of the shame of not leaving our nations prouder, stronger, and wealthier for our children. An alliance ready to defend our people, to safeguard our interests, and to preserve the freedom of action that allows us to shape our own destiny. Not one that exists to operate a global welfare state and atone for the purported sins of past generations. An alliance that does not allow its power to be outsourced, constrained, or subordinated to systems beyond its control. One that does not depend on others for the critical necessities of its national life. And one that does not maintain the polite pretense that our way of life is just one among many, and that asks for permission before it acts. And above all, an alliance based on the recognition that we, the West, have inherited together. What we have inherited together is something that is unique and distinctive and irreplaceable. Because this, after all, is the very foundation of the transatlantic bond. Acting together in this way, we will not just help recover a sane foreign policy. It will restore to us a clear sense of ourselves. It will restore a place in the world. And in so doing, it will rebuke and deter the forces of civilizational erasure that today menace both America and Europe alike. So in a time of headlines heralding the end of the transatlantic era, let it be known and clear to all that this is neither our goal nor our wish. Because for us Americans, our home may be in the Western Hemisphere, but we will always be a child of Europe. Our story began with an Italian explorer whose adventure into the great unknown to discover a new world brought Christianity to the Americas and became the legend that defined the imagination of our pioneer nation. Our first colonies were built by English settlers, to whom we owe not just the language we speak, but the whole of our political and legal system.
This digital calendar, lightening my mental load, makes it worth every...
Annoying, are they not? What the hell? Oh no, don't. I didn't mean to pause. I meant to mute it. I want to hear this crap. Oh, Jesus.
That proud, hardy clan from the hills of Ulster that gave us Davy Crockett and Mark Twain and Teddy Roosevelt and Neil Armstrong. Our great Midwestern heartland was built by German farmers and craftsmen who transformed empty plains into a global agricultural powerhouse. And by the way,
full speech.
Dramatically upgraded the quality of American beer. Our expansion into the interior followed the footsteps of French fur traders and explorers whose names, by the way, still adorn the street signs and town names all across the Mississippi Valley. Our horses, our ranches, our rodeos, the entire romance of the cowboy archetype that became synonymous with the American West. These were born in Spain. And our largest and most iconic city was named New Amsterdam before it was named New York. And you know that in the year that my country was founded, Lorenzo and Catalina Giraldi lived in Casal Monferrato in the Kingdom of Piedmont, Sardinia. And Jose and Manuela Reina lived in Sevilla, Spain. I don't know what, if anything, they knew about the 13 colonies which had gained their independence from the British Empire. But here's what I'm certain of. They could have never imagined that 250 years later, one of their direct descendants would be back here today on this continent as the chief diplomat of that infant nation. And yet here I am, reminded by my own story that both our histories and our fates will always be linked. Together, we rebuilt a shattered continent in the wake of 2 devastating world wars. When we found ourselves divided once again by the Iron Curtain, the Free West linked arms with the courageous dissidents struggling against tyranny in the East to defeat Soviet communism.
Is out of control.
We have fought against each other, then reconciled, then fought, then reconciled again. And we have bled and died side by side on battlefields from Kapyong to Kandahar. And I'm here today to leave it clear that America is charting the path for a new century of prosperity, and that once again, we want to do it together with you, our cherished allies and our oldest friends.
You got ears like Spock. I never noticed that before. This isn't the full speech. Apparently, even though it says it's the full speech right here, it says full speech. It is not the full speech. The full speech is 29 minutes long. I don't know why this shortened version popped up as the full speech, but you get the idea. It was a decent speech. There was a little bit where he talks about empire and stuff. Yeah, here it is right here, 29 minutes and 14 seconds. So if you want to watch the whole speech, there it is, 29 minutes and 14 seconds. He talks a little bit about empire and wanting to preserve the empire. And I have my issues with wanting to preserve the empire, but at this point in time, I don't think we're at a nucleus into which we can safely dismantle the empire and regain a republic foothold. That would definitely be a good goal to have in mind going forward. But I don't like the worship of the empire. I don't like the idea that we can replace God and that the empire is the ultimate authority. So that ultimately bothers me that, you know, that a lot of these politicians go down that route. But but the globalization, the open borders, the willingness for people to sacrifice other people's children so that some refugee or some, you know, economic migrant can enter this nation and drive down the prices of labor while driving up the prices of goods and housing. It drives me insane. If you don't have any children, you need to think about those of us that do before you go out spouting off about, oh, well, theoretically, this should be good. Well, yeah, fine. In theory, have fun. Have fun in your little theoretical world, because me and my children, we live in the real world. We work. You know, I have children that are in physical labor. I have been driving a truck for 23 years. Theoretically, there isn't a problem with migrants with no driver's license and that can't speak the language to drive a 80,000 pound vehicle, but in reality, it causes a lot of problems, a lot of deaths, and a lot of heartache. So y'all can live in your theoretical world and wax poetically on your philosophy, but your philosophy has nothing to do with the real world, and it's not going to affect any significant positive change for those of us that are fighting for our children's future. Anyway, that's all I got to say. Hope y'all have a good week. This one's coming out early because I have a really busy week this week and I wanted to get it out. We'll be continuing to read the prologue over there at my Substack, TommySalmons.com, or you can go to my YouTube channel. I finally got it placed in a position where you can find it. It's at Year Zero Pod on YouTube. So you can find the prologue either at Year Zero Pod on YouTube or TommySalmons.com, my Substack. So I will see y'all then, and we will be looking forward to doing another podcast next week. Until then, you got to keep fighting globalism, man.